Major funding for Marcia Adams' Heartland Cooking is provided by Marilad Industries, America's cabinet maker committed to quality in a variety of kitchen and bath cabinetry styles. By Maple Leaf Farms, a symbol for ducklings and frozen entrees, chef quality you can count on. By Souder Woodworking, producers of ready-to-assemble furniture for the home and office, America's furniture craftsmen with more than a half-century of experience.
Hello there, I'm Marcia Adams and welcome to Heartland Cooking. This is the first of a 26-part series about Heartland cookery, which includes 8 states in the Midwest. We've had so much fun doing this series that we're really eager to share it with you. Midwestern food has historic roots connected to New England and immigrant cookery. It's straightforward, seasonal, and sincere. All the things that I think are important, and for my meal, I think you do too. As we've traveled throughout the Midwest, collecting recipes and doing photography for the book and the series, what has been most exciting to me is to rediscover the richness of the variety of farm, field, and lake produce in the Heartland. We have a newfound confidence about our regional cookery, and it's about time. The first thing we're going to do today is visit a food festival, which is one way that our old and honored recipes are kept alive. And this particular festival was one of the best I visited in preparing for Heartland. It's a Sauerkraut festival in Waynesville, Ohio, 20 miles south of Dayton. And it's a popular one, as you can see by the crowds. The town calls itself the antiques capital of the Midwest and has over 35 large stores lining its 5-block main street. At the festival, you find all sorts of foods made with sauerkraut. This little fellow with his painted face was having the time of his life at his very first Sauerkraut festival. There's lots of things to do there. And the American Legion grills brats over charcoal and serves them with kraut. What else? My husband, Dick, endorses the pizza. You can see he's a Boston Red Sox fan. The whole town comes together to give this annual festival. It's truly a community thing, rather like a krauty Mardi Gras. The band's mother's project is to stir up enormous batches of chocolate sauerkraut fudge. It's really good. And the St. Augustine Church makes thousands of the best cabbage rolls I've ever tasted. They're simmered in a real well-seasoned tomato sauce. And this is a kraut sundae, a baked potato topped with kraut and milk cheese and bacon, and it's being enjoyed by Tim Westoven, one of our camera crew members. Donuts, too, have kraut in them, and they're rolled in a mixture of sugar and cinnamon and piping hot. And you can even buy the donut holes, too. I had a chance to talk to Dennis Dalton, local historian and raconteur, who's the author of a cookbook, and he filled me in on the details of the festival. Dennis, I want you to tell me how long this festival's been going on in Waynesville.
It's in its 21st year.
Well, why did this town choose to do sauerkraut? Because it's a wonderful idea.
Well, in our early history, we have some German influence. But the night that this festival was conceived, the man who put it all together had just had sauerkraut for supper. And his name was Albert Cap Stubbs. And he was our local undertaker.
Great story.
But quite an entrepreneur and a leader in civic goings-on here in Waynesville.
How big is Waynesville?
Waynesville is just a little less than 1,800.
How many people are here during your 2-day festival?
Usually somewhere between 150,000 and 250,000.
Boggles the mind, but I can see why. The food is so good. Great arts and crafts. Now, do you have it the same time each year?
It's always the second weekend of October.
Second weekend of October. One thing that's so charming to me is that you do not have the carny influence at all.
Right.
This is all just really good food and wonderful crafts.
Yes, the quality, and that is due to our Chamber of Commerce, the festival sponsor. The Ohio Sauerkraut Festival has really built a reputation for good crafts, and they're screened very carefully.
Sort of a juried situation
type
then
of situation.
This.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've been so gracious to me today, and I want to encourage everybody in the whole United States to come to Waynesville and try this wonderful sauerkraut experience.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure showing you around my hometown and the home of the Ohio Sauerkraut Festival.
These are a couple of things I bought at the festival. I'm a pushover for cows, especially Holstein, and I can tell by the snout on this ceramic pig that it's probably a Berkshire. But at any rate, the Kraut Festival at Waynesville, Ohio is really lots of fun, and if you're in the area, you should certainly go to see it. As you might guess, today we're going to do all sauerkraut recipes. And sauerkraut is a food associated with the Midwestern states of the Heartland, as I'm calling it. I'm really excited about showing you some of the wonderful dishes of this very large region of the United States over the next few weeks. Sauerkraut is considered sort of a German specialty, but it also has Pennsylvania Dutch ethnic overtones as well. We're going to make 4 things today, and I bet you've never even heard of the first one. It's called a sauerkraut chocolate cake. And we begin by draining a 1-pound can of sauerkraut and then pulsing it in your food processor bowl about 4 or 5 times so it sort of looks like this. Just finely chopped, you see, and then set that aside. And then to prepare the cake, in your mixer bowl, beat together 2/3 cup of margarine, or you could use butter, but in this particular case, margarine works well. 2/3 cup of margarine and 1.5 cups of granulated sugar, and beat that for 3 minutes. That's a good rule of thumb. Now this has already been beaten for me to save time, as you might guess. And then to this, we're going to add 3 eggs, and we'll add them one at a time. You should always break the eggs first into another cup to make sure that you don't get a shell into your cake batter. And also, you might have what is called a bloody egg. Now, that's what my mother told me 50 years ago, and I swear I've never seen a bloody egg, but I still do this. So, this is for you, Mother. I'm still doing it, just like you taught me. Now, to this mixture, then, we're going to add some other very good things. 2 teaspoons of vanilla, and it's all pre-measured for me, and 1/2 teaspoon of regular cocoa. This is the kind of cocoa that you drink in a cup with milk. And because cocoa powder flies all over, and we certainly don't want it on the ceiling where it would be apt to be, I'm going to use the shield on this to mix it in, and then I'm going to take it off again. 1/2 cup of cocoa powder, and be sure you get this down, 1 teaspoon each of salt, baking powder, and baking soda. And then just beat this together so it's well combined. See that cocoa powder is trying to get out of there, but we foxed it. I'll take this off again. That's the only disadvantage of the shield, but there are times when you really need them and they're very convenient, like today. And then we're going to add to this 2 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour and 1 cup of cold water. Now, when you're making a cake, you should always alternately add the dry ingredients with the wet, and you start and end with the dry. So it's about 1/3 of the dry ingredients. Quickly mix it in. 1/2 cup of the cold, 1/3 here of the flour again, rest of the water, the rest of the dry, and I'm going to whoops, should have left that shield on a bit longer. And then we're going to add the magic ingredient, this pulsed sauerkraut. Now, probably this whole recipe came into being because one day someone was making up a chocolate cake and she had some sauerkraut left over. That's how so many good recipes came into being, as you might guess. So get this mess out of the way. I have trouble thinking in a mess. And then we're going to just quickly combine. Now, the temperature for the oven is 350 degrees for 30 minutes. That is if you are using a metal pan. If you're not using a metal pan, lower the temperature to 325 degrees because the glass dish conducts heat much hotter than a metal pan does. Now, do I have all this in? I think so. Now we're going to pour this. See this batter? You can see the chocolate batter has the kraut all integrated into it, but because it's been pulsed in that food processor, it's going to bake up and be practically disintegrated. And I'm going to slip that under here, and then we're going to make a very quick and very delicious chocolate frosting. Let me wipe this up. Messy, messy, Marcia Adams. There. In this bowl, we have combined, and this is a real simple frosting recipe. We've combined a half a cup of soft butter, and I think butter is better for a cake frosting because it holds up, what should I say, under storage better, because you're going to probably want to refrigerate this. And 4 cups of confectioner's sugar. And this is what it looks like. It's sort of like a meal. And then we're going to add some things to it that are going to soften it up real quick. And there's a new product on the market, and it is pre-melted chocolate. And we're going to talk about that a little later on. But first of all, we're going to add 1 egg white. And this is how you separate an egg. Break it in half. And then you just sort of let the white come down, and then you pour it back into this. And there you have it. Now you can save that yolk. You can freeze yolks, actually. And you make them into puddings when you get enough of them. Now add the yolk. And a teaspoon of vanilla. We'll just splash that in. And a speck of salt. And 3 either melted squares of chocolate or 3 packets of chocolate. Now in this case, we've used the 3 packets, and I'll show you those later. Oh, they save so much time. Though there are some recipes, really, I think it's better if you use the squares. Now we're going to mix this all together. And you have just about the quickest frosting you ever saw. This made up so quickly that my mother used to make it, and we would put it between graham crackers for graham cracker cookies, and then she would serve that with a fresh fruit. Let's see what this looks like. It's ready. That's perfectly spreadable, but if yours is a little stiff, you can add, of course, to it a little bit of hot water. This was the packet I was talking to you about. You simply cut that open with a pair of scissors and add it to your ingredients. Now, I bet you think that when this cake is finished up, it has little pieces of green cabbage sticking out of it. Well, ho, 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 it doesn't. Isn't that elegant? How could you ask for a better looking chocolate cake than that? One of the thrilling things about researching Heartland cooking was discovering these little pockets of ethnic cookery, quite unchanged from the times when the early immigrants came to America. And one of those little pockets of cookery were the Estonians. And we really owe a lot to these immigrants who brought with their wonderful recipes with them. And for the Estonians, one of the biggest contributions they made to cuisine was their Estonian pork and kraut, plus barley, which I found to be a very unexpected ingredient. And for this dish, we start with 2 pounds of kraut in the bottom of a very large pot. And you want it to be a deep pot because it's going to have a lot of ingredients in it by the time we're finished. And to that, you're going to add 2 pounds of boneless pork chunks. Now this also could be just a big piece of pork if you like. It's done either way in Estonia. This recipe calls for pork loin. They probably would have used pork shoulder. You put that on top of the kraut, 2 pounds of kraut, 2 pounds of pork loin chunks. And then to that, we're going to add 1/2 of a large apple cut in large chunks. And the ingredient surprised me so much, and that was the pearled barley. And I want to show you the difference between a pearled barley and a regular barley, and I have it here. This white part, the white grains are the pearled, and the dark grains are the regular. Let's put it up here. Now, pearled barley has the outer husk and the inner husk removed, and this is what the regular grain looks like. This would take much, much longer to cook. Now, I just put in there 1/2 cup of barley. Actually, it is known as the oldest cultivated grain, and was eaten in every country from China to Ethiopia. Now, I'm going to finish this up and then stir it, and I'll tell you some more about the Estonians and Ethiopia. and barley. We add to this a tablespoon of brown sugar and a teaspoon of salt and a half a teaspoon of pepper, and then 2 quarts of hot water. You'll be surprised how much moisture the barley absorbs. Now, barley grows very well at high temperatures, up to 15,000 feet. And today, however, it's used mostly for animal fodder, except for us human beings. We human beings, I should say. We use it for whiskey and beer, and then we do grind it into flour that we use for some pastry dishes, but not bread. It doesn't have very much gluten in it. Now mix this up well. You know, the Estonians are a unique group of people. Estonia is a very small country on the Baltic Sea in northern Europe, and it has belonged to Russia for a great many years. They've been a very brave and courageous group of people, and many of them immigrated here because of political reasons. But listen, they know how to cook. And many of them settled in Minnesota because the cold climate of Minnesota reminded them of Estonia, where summers only get to be 50 degrees. So the barley in here will swell and thicken. It also is a good thickener in other soups like turkey soup as well. It has a pleasant nutty flavor. Now you want to cook this for 2.5 to 4 hours. Now that seems like a long time, and the reason there's a big variation is because of the tenderness of the meat. If you use a pork shoulder, it'll take 4 hours. Pork loin is about 2.5. Oh, it's so good. The ethnic group, however, that has had the biggest influence on Midwestern cookery has been the Germans. The meatloaf recipe that I'm going to demonstrate is from Herman, Missouri, which was settled by the Germans. And they even have a German festival, and if you can get there during that time, that's really good eating because you have the wonderful German food that's served practically by the whole town. Now this is a wonderful meatloaf. Makes other meatloaf just pale by comparison. And we start with 2 cups of rye breadcrumbs. And you can use dark rye or light rye. And then to that, I would like you to add 1 pound of drained sauerkraut. All the recipes we use except one are drained. This isn't chopped, however, it's just drained. And then we're going to add a half a cup of milk and a half a cup of chopped onion, and 3 eggs that have been lightly beaten. And the seasoning is caraway, a teaspoon of that, because that is a very German spice, and a teaspoon of pepper, and 2 teaspoons, or tablespoons, I would like tablespoons, I think, 2 tablespoons of chili sauce or ketchup. Now let me repeat those for you. Those ingredients as I mix them up. You want to use 2 cups of rye breadcrumbs, a pound of drained kraut, a half a cup of onions, a half a cup of milk, 3 eggs lightly beaten, teaspoon of caraway, half a teaspoon to a teaspoon of black pepper, and 2 tablespoons of chili sauce. Now mix this all up. You know what, I'm going to use my hands because it's just quicker and it's more thorough, because for meatloaf you really want to have it well done. Now, one thing I discovered when I was researching Missouri, because I really did a lot of research for this series and cookbook, was that there were a lot of fascinating women who came out of Missouri, and they have left an impact all over the United States. One of the well-known women, whose name you'll recognize, was Laura Ingalls Wilder, who wrote The Little House on the Prairie and other books. And also from Hannibal, Missouri, came the unsinkable Molly Brown, who survived the sinking of the Titanic and helped a lot of other people off at the same time during that tragedy. And later she went on to be a happy socialite in Denver. And then there was Carrie Nation. She was the passionate and determined hatchet-wielding prohibitionist. Now, incidentally, did I tell you you need 3 eggs in here? Now we're going to add 2 pounds of ground beef. One more thing about Carrie Nation. In Missouri, in a little old cemetery, her tombstone bears the understated inscription, "She hath done what she could." And she really did, didn't she? No matter whether you approved of prohibition or not, it took a lot of nerve to be Carrie Nation, I think. Now, mix this up thoroughly and quickly. Now, people ask me about meatloaves. Should you make it in a square? Should you make it in an oval? Do you completely fill the dish? My theory is that you should make it in an oval or a square, it doesn't matter which, but just leave enough room around it that it can roast, because it's that nice roasted flavor on the sides and on the top that give it its flavor. I'm going to transfer this all to this greased dish. If I'm lucky, yes, that stood together nicely. There we are. And remember what I said, leave that space around the outside so it can roast. Now, some people would probably pour a little more chili sauce over the top, or you could even add a slice of bacon or two, but that would really be gilding the lily. This has enough flavor with the kraut that you don't need to do another thing to it. Now, you want to bake this at 350 degrees for 1 1/4 hours. And this is what it looked like. It's all finished. I generally make a double recipe of this, and so I have one on hand to freeze, just because if you're going to mess up the kitchen, you might as well mess it up for 2 meatloaves instead of 1. You can never have enough meatloaf, for heaven's sake. This is getting to be sort of an underground dish that's getting popular all over again. You're seeing it on the menu of best restaurants. Oh, isn't that pretty? The French call this pâté, and it's very chic. And we call it meatloaf and apologize for it. Isn't that ridiculous? Actually, the recipe in the cookbook for this meatloaf calls for just 2 eggs. I think I said 3. You could use 2 or 3. It really wouldn't matter. You don't have to be too precise about meatloaf. Now we'll just garnish this with a little bit of parsley, maybe. And an apple slice. My friend Lois Hamilton, who looks after these things backstage, does this much better than I do. I think she's probably moaning with despair as she watches me do this. Now, the very last recipe is a real treasure. It's a baked tomato and sauerkraut casserole. And you're going to have to get used to hearing me say tomato. I can't change. So I truly like this recipe because you make it all right in the dish. This is a 1-pound can of undrained sauerkraut. And they would have had, and when I say they would have had, we too have all of these ingredients in our kitchen at any time. And they certainly would have had at the turn of the century. It was one of those dishes they could make up immediately. And it bakes a long time. And you wanted to do that so it is all caramelized on top. So to this 1 pound of undrained kraut, add a 14-ounce can of coarsely chopped tomatoes, and 1 cup of granulated sugar, and then 6 slices of raw bacon, not cooked, raw. You want the bacon fat to get right down into this dish. And then sort of crumble that in. And then a liberal teaspoon of black pepper. Now you just might as well get in there right now with your hands and mix this up, because you're going to have to separate the bacon slices so the bacon is evenly distributed the whole dish. Isn't that going to be something? And the secret to this dish is that you let it cook for a very, very long time so it does indeed become caramelized. Bake it at 325 degrees for 2 1/4 hours. And when it comes out of the oven, the fragrance is just so delightful. And I also want to tell you that even though this would almost be considered a peasant dish, it's certainly elegant enough for company, and I have served it at very nice dinner parties. Now just sprinkle a little parsley on here very casually, and let's take it over and let's review what we did today. First of all, a country-style chocolate cake, very moist and lovely. And look at that frosting. Tip top. The Estonian pork, barley, and kraut. You can see why the Estonians love this dish on a cold winter day. And this is the German-style meatloaf, laced with rye, breadcrumbs, and sauerkraut. Makes great sandwiches. And then the fancy, if you like, baked sauerkraut and tomatoes, a dish that's a very good meat accompaniment to any roast pork or strong-flavored game dish. Since we're starting a whole new series today, I thought it would be fun to share with you antique dishes and utensils from the period of the food we prepared. So today, of course, it's sort of kraut-oriented. This would be a crock that kraut would have been made in. This is a bumblebee pattern. They weren't made much after 1910 when preserving jars came into being. And this is a slaw cutter. The cabbage would have been put in this box and then run up and down on these blades. This still works as perfectly as the day it was made. Says something for the wood carver, don't you think? This would have been the way they would have chopped a small amount of cabbage. This would have been the first food processor. They really had things tough. But on the other hand, look at this wooden butter paddle. It has this very well-defined hook, so it would be placed on the side of the bowl and would not slip down into it. The name of the quilt today, incidentally, which is just a backdrop, is called Brickwork. So until next time, ess a gut. Eat good.
Major funding for Marcia Adams Heartland Cooking is provided by Marcia Industries, America's cabinet maker, committed to quality in a variety of kitchen and bath cabinetry styles. By Maple Leaf Farms, a symbol for ducklings and frozen entrees, chef quality you can count on. By Sauder Woodworking, America's furniture craftsman with more than 50 years' experience, Sauder provides ready-to-assemble furniture for today's home and office.